The number of food processing jobs across the region is dropping. Thank you for joining us. I'm Philip Catafamo. A Creighton University survey found Nebraska is taking the hardest hit, accounting for nearly half of those cuts. I asked about the numbers and what could be causing the trend.
Factories across the Mid-American region, from Minnesota to Arkansas, filled more orders and produced more goods in June. Despite that, the jobs picture is not what it used to be, especially in food processing.
In terms of food processing, Nebraska lost about 4,000 jobs in this period we examined. Now, 4,000 food processing jobs, 4,900 overall manufacturing jobs.
Dr. Ernie Goss with Creighton University says the region lost about 8,000 jobs in food processing within the last year. Nebraska accounted for almost half of them.
It foreshadows other job losses that may be coming as well. For example, Kellogg and Skylark here in Omaha. Those job losses. And we had replacements, of course. Sustainable beef opened up in North Platte. Now that's the good news. Unfortunately, those were 850 jobs, which really replaced the 3,200 jobs lost at the Tyson plant.
He's referring to the plant in Lexington, Nebraska, which closed in January. Dr. Goss blames some of this on factory relocation for larger manufacturers, trade policies, and tariffs.
Another factor is that we've seen the smallest cattle herd since 1960. Now that's across Nebraska and across the nation. That's a big, big issue. So what that did was raise costs for these producers, Tyson, for example, and they didn't have the capabilities to stand that cost increase.
Dr. Goss says the figure is troubling but expected, especially with the Tyson plant.
Those are really important jobs because, generally speaking, they're well above the state average hourly wage. So these are good jobs, and a lot of those people, individuals, have been working for these plants. In the case of Tyson, probably some in there perhaps as many as 30 years, even more.
Despite losses in food processing, the survey also showed better production, higher inventories, and Minnesota adding more manufacturing jobs.
While we're seeing losses in food processing, Dr. Goss says industries like healthcare and construction are seeing job gains right here in Nebraska.